The summer I turned 20, I thought I'd escaped the weight of my life, until I stepped into Ethan's world and found a secret that cracked my heart open. It wasn't just the humid Virginia air or the endless cicada hum that made my skin prickle when I arrived at his family's sprawling suburban home. It was the way Ethan's hazel eyes flickered with something unspoken, something that made my pulse race before I even knew why. I'd known Ethan Carter since freshman year at NYU, where we bonded over late-night pizza runs and shared playlists in the dorms. He was the kind of guy who could make a crowded room feel like it was just the two of you, charismatic, quick to laugh, with a smile that felt like sunlight. I, Lucas Nguyen, was the quieter one, always sketching in my notebook, my Vietnamese roots making me feel like I was caught between worlds. When Ethan invited me to his family's place in Richmond for the summer, I pictured lazy days by the pool and maybe a chance to sort out the feelings I'd been burying for him since spring. The Carter house was a postcard of American suburbia. White picket fence, rose bushes, and a backyard that stretched into a small grove of oak trees. Ethan's mom, Diane, greeted me with a warm hug and a plate of homemade cookies, her laughter filling the kitchen. His dad, Robert, was different. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a handshake that felt like a warning. His eyes, a colder shade of Ethan's hazel, scanned me like he was looking for flaws. "Welcome, Lucas," he said, his voice clipped. "Make yourself at home." I nodded, ignoring the unease curling in my gut. That first night, Ethan and I stayed up late in his room, sprawled on the floor with a bowl of popcorn between us. The air was thick with summer heat, and his fan did little to cut through it. "You ever feel like you're hiding something, even from yourself?" Ethan asked, his voice soft, almost lost in the hum of the night. I froze, my heart thudding. I wanted to tell him how I felt, how his laugh made my chest ache, how I'd spent months sketching his profile in secret. But I just shrugged, muttering, "Yeah, sometimes." The next morning, we biked to a nearby lake, the kind of place where dragonflies skim the water and the air smells like pine. Ethan stripped off his shirt and dove in, his laughter echoing as he splashed me. I couldn't stop staring at the way the sunlight caught his skin, the way his wet hair clung to his forehead. "Come on, Lucas," he called, grinning. I joined him, the cold water shocking my system, but his presence warmed me in ways I couldn't explain. As we floated side by side, our shoulders brushing, I felt a pull, a magnetic, terrifying need to close the distance between us. That afternoon, back at the house, I noticed something off. Robert was in his study, the door ajar, his voice low and tense on the phone. "No, I told you it's handled," he said, his tone sharp. I lingered in the hallway, pretending to study a family photo on the wall. A younger Ethan, his parents, and a man I didn't recognize, all smiling at a beach. The frame was dusty, like it hadn't been touched in years. When Robert emerged, he caught me looking. "Nosy, huh?" he said, his smile tight. I mumbled an apology, but his stare lingered, heavy with something I couldn't place. Over the next few days, Ethan and I grew closer. We'd sneak out to the backyard at night, lying under the stars, sharing stories about our fears, our dreams. One night, he told me about his uncle, James, who'd lived with them when Ethan was a kid. "He was awesome," Ethan said, his voice wistful. "Taught me how to play guitar, took me camping. Then he just left. Dad never talks about him." I wanted to ask more, but Ethan's expression closed off, and I let it drop. The tension in the house grew thicker. Diane's warmth seemed strained, like she was holding something back. Robert's mood swung from distant to outright cold, especially when Ethan and I were together. One evening, as we grilled burgers in the backyard, Robert watched us from the porch, his arms crossed. "You two are awfully close," he said, his tone flat but laced with something sharp. Ethan laughed it off, but I saw the flicker of unease in his eyes. It was the fourth night when everything shifted. Ethan and I were in the grove behind the house, string lights glowing above us, fireflies blinking in the dusk. He was quieter than usual, his fingers twisting a blade of grass. "Lucas," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if I told you I've been scared to say something to you?" My heart stopped. Before I could respond, he leaned in, his breath warm against my cheek, and kissed me. It was soft, tentative, but it set my world on fire. I kissed him back, my hands finding his, the world narrowing to just us. But as we pulled apart, a shadow moved in the darkness. Robert stood at the edge of the grove, his face unreadable. "Ethan," he said, his voice like ice. "Inside. Now." Ethan's hand tightened on mine for a moment before he let go, his eyes full of fear. As he followed his dad into the house, I stood frozen, the weight of that moment sinking in. Something was wrong, something bigger than us, and I had a feeling it was tied to the secret Robert was keeping. The air felt heavier after that night, like the house itself was holding its breath. Ethan avoided my eyes at breakfast, his usual warmth replaced by a quiet tension. I wanted to ask him about the kiss, about his dad's reaction. But Diane's forced cheerfulness and Robert's silent brooding filled the kitchen with an unspoken warning. I spent the morning sketching in the backyard, trying to capture the oak tree where Ethan and I had kissed. My pencil traced the curve of its branches, but my mind kept replaying Robert's cold stare. What had he seen? What did he know? I was so lost in thought that I didn't hear Ethan approach until he sat beside me, his knee brushing mine. "I'm sorry about last night," he whispered, his voice raw. "Dad, he's complicated." "Complicated how?" I asked, setting my sketchbook down. Ethan hesitated, his fingers fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. "He's always been strict, but lately it's worse. Ever since I came out to them last year, he's been different." My heart sank. Ethan was gay? I'd suspected, hoped even, but hearing it out loud made my feelings for him feel both possible and dangerous. Before I could respond, Diane called us in for lunch. The meal was tense, Robert's silence louder than any words. Afterward, Ethan suggested we explore the attic, a dusty maze of old furniture and forgotten boxes. "Maybe we'll find something fun," he said, forcing a smile. I followed, grateful for the distraction. The attic smelled of mildew and memories. We sifted through old photos, vinyl records, and a guitar case Ethan said belonged to his Uncle James. "He left this behind," Ethan said, running his fingers over the worn leather. "Dad never talks about why he left." Curiosity gnawed at me, but I didn't push. Instead, we found a box labeled James's stuff. Inside were letters, postcards, and a journal. Ethan's eyes lit up, but his hands trembled as he opened the journal. The entries were short, written in a hurried scrawl. One caught my eye. "Robert found out about me and David. He says it's a sin that I'm tearing the family apart. I can't stay here." I froze, the words sinking in. Ethan's uncle was gay too, and Robert had driven him away? Ethan's face paled as he read over my shoulder. "David, I remember him," he whispered. "He used to visit when I was a kid. I thought he was just a friend." We kept reading, piecing together a story of love and rejection. James and David had been together, living quietly until Robert confronted them. The final entry was dated 10 years ago. "I'm leaving tonight. I can't live under his judgment anymore. I hope Ethan understands one day." Ethan closed the journal, his hands shaking. "He never told me," he said, his voice breaking. "Why didn't he tell me?" That night, we sat in the grove again, the string lights casting soft shadows. Ethan was quieter, his usual spark dimmed. "I think Dad's afraid I'll end up like James," he said. "That's why he freaked out last night." I reached for his hand, my heart pounding. "You're not James," I said. "And you're not alone." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine, and for a moment, I thought he'd kiss me again. But he pulled back, fear flickering in his gaze. The next day, I overheard Robert on the phone again, his voice low and angry. "I don't care what you think, Diane. We can't let this happen again." My stomach twisted. Was he talking about Ethan? About us? I wanted to confront him, but fear held me back. Instead, I told Ethan what I'd heard. His face hardened. "I need to know the truth," he said. "About James, about everything." We decided to search Robert's study while he was out. The room was meticulous, all polished wood and locked drawers. Ethan found a key hidden in a desk lamp, and we opened a file cabinet. Inside was a folder labeled James. It held legal documents, letters, and a photo of James and David, their arms around each other, smiling. One letter was from James, dated a year ago. "Robert, I'm happy now. David and I are married. I forgive you, but I can't come back." Ethan's eyes filled with tears. "He's alive," he whispered. "He's okay." But the moment was cut short. Robert's car pulled into the driveway. Ethan shoved the folder back, and we slipped out of the study, hearts racing. That night, Robert called Ethan into his office. I waited in the hallway, my nerves on edge. Their voices rose, Ethan's sharp with defiance, Robert's heavy with anger. "You don't get to control me," Ethan shouted. The door slammed, and Ethan stormed out, his face red. "He knows about us," he said, grabbing my hand. "And he's not going to let it go." The house felt like a pressure cooker after Ethan's fight with his dad. Every creak of the floorboards, every glance from Robert, carried a weight I couldn't shake. Ethan was different too. His laughter was gone, replaced by a restless energy. "I can't stay here forever," he told me one morning, his voice low as we sat on the back porch. "Not like this." I wanted to fix it, to take away the pain in his eyes, but I didn't know how. Instead, I suggested we get out of the house. We drove to a local diner, a retro spot with neon signs and checkered floors. Over milkshakes, Ethan opened up. "I came out to my parents last summer," he said, stirring his straw absently. "Mom was okay, but Dad, he said I was confused, that I'd ruined my life. I thought he'd come around, but now, with you here," he trailed off, his eyes meeting mine. My heart ached, wanting to tell him I'd be there, no matter what. Back at the house, Diane tried to keep things normal, baking pies and playing old jazz records. But the tension was palpable. One evening, she pulled me aside while Ethan was upstairs. "Lucas, I know things are hard," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Robert loves Ethan, but he's struggling. Give him time." I nodded, but her words didn't ease the knot in my chest. Time wasn't what Ethan needed, acceptance was. That night, Ethan snuck into my room, his face lit by moonlight. "I found something," he whispered, holding a USB drive. It was in Dad's desk. We plugged it into my laptop, our heads close as we scrolled through files. Most were work-related, but one folder stood out: correspondence. It held emails between Robert and a private investigator, dated 6 months ago. Robert had hired someone to track down James. The last email read, "Located in Seattle. Married, stable. No contact advised." Ethan's breath hitched. "He's been keeping tabs on him," he said, anger flashing in his eyes. "But he never told me." The next day, Ethan confronted Diane. "Why didn't you tell me about Uncle James?" he demanded, his voice shaking. Diane's face crumpled. "We wanted to protect you," she said. "Your dad thought it was best if you didn't know." Ethan's fists clenched. "Best for who?" "Him." He stormed out, and I followed, finding him in the grove, his shoulders heaving. I wrapped my arms around him, feeling his body tremble. "We'll find James," I said. "We'll figure this out." Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. I need to know he's okay. And I need Dad to see I'm not a mistake. We spent the afternoon planning. Ethan found an address in Seattle from the emails, and we decided to call James. But first, we needed to be sure. I suggested we dig deeper, maybe find David's contact info. Ethan agreed, but the fear in his eyes mirrored my own. What if this pushed Robert too far? That evening, Robert was home early, his mood darker than usual. At dinner, he barely spoke, his fork scraping against the plate. When Ethan mentioned James, the room went silent. Don't, Robert said, his voice low. You don't know what you're talking about. Ethan pushed back. I know he's my uncle, and you drove him away because he loved someone. Robert's face reddened, and he stood, towering over the table. Enough, he shouted. Diane reached for his arm, but he pulled away, storming out. Later, in the grove, Ethan was a mess. I can't do this anymore, he said, tears streaming down his face. I held him, my own eyes burning. You're enough, I whispered. You've always been enough. He kissed me then, desperate and raw, like he was clinging to something real. For a moment, the world was just us, the cicadas singing, the stars above us. But the weight of Robert's anger loomed, and I knew we were running out of time. The next morning, Ethan was determined. We're calling James, he said, his voice steady despite the shadows under his eyes. We used my phone to avoid Robert's suspicion, dialing the number from the investigator's email. The line rang twice before a warm voice answered. Hello, Uncle James. Ethan's voice cracked. There was a pause. Then, Ethan, is that you? The call lasted an hour, Ethan's words tumbling out. His anger, his fear, his need to understand. James listened, his voice calm but heavy with emotion. He told Ethan about his life with David, their marriage, their quiet happiness in Seattle. I wanted to reach out, James said. But your dad, he made it clear I wasn't welcome. Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. I'm not him, he said. I want you in my life. When the call ended, Ethan was lighter, like a weight had lifted. But the house felt darker. Robert had overheard part of the call, his face a mask of fury when we returned. You went behind my back, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Ethan stood his ground. You lied to me about James. You can't control who I am. Robert's jaw clenched, and for a moment, I thought he'd lash out. Instead, he turned and left, the door slamming behind him. Diane was distraught, torn between her husband and her son. I should have done more, she admitted, her hands twisting a dish towel. I wanted to comfort her, but my focus was Ethan. We spent the day in his room, planning our next move. James had invited us to visit Seattle, and Ethan was ready to go. I need to see him, he said, and I want you with me. My heart soared, but fear lingered. What would Robert do when he found out? That night we packed light bags, planning to leave at dawn. But Robert was waiting when we crept downstairs. You're not going anywhere, he said, his voice cold. Ethan faced him, his eyes blazing. You don't get to decide who I love or who I am. Robert's face softened for a split second, then hardened again. You're making a mistake, he said, just like James. Ethan's voice broke. The only mistake is you thinking love is wrong. I stepped forward, my voice shaking but firm. Ethan's not alone in this. I love him, and I'm not going anywhere. The words hung in the air, raw and true. Robert stared at me, his expression unreadable, then walked away. Diane appeared, tears in her eyes. Go, she whispered. I'll handle him. We didn't wait to see if she meant it. We drove through the night, the road stretching endlessly before us. Ethan's hand found mine, his grip tight. Thank you, he said, his voice soft. I squeezed his hand, my heart full. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, it felt like ours. Seattle was a world away from Richmond's suffocating heat. The air was crisp, the city alive with color and sound. James and David met us at a small cafe near their home, a cozy place with mismatched chairs and the smell of fresh coffee. James was older than in the photos, his hair graying, but his smile was Ethan's, warm, unguarded. David was quieter, with kind eyes and a gentle laugh. They hugged Ethan like he was family they'd never lost, and when they welcomed me, I felt like I belonged. Over coffee, Ethan told them everything. Our kiss, Robert's anger, the secrets we'd uncovered. James listened, his face heavy with understanding. Your dad's carrying his own pain, he said. He was raised to believe love like ours was wrong. It broke us apart, but I hope he'll see differently one day. Ethan nodded, but I saw the hurt in his eyes. He wanted his dad's acceptance, not just his tolerance. We spent a week with James and David, exploring Seattle's markets, hiking in the nearby forests, and laughing over late-night board games. Ethan came alive in a way I hadn't seen, his laughter free, his hand always finding mine. One evening, as we walked along the waterfront, the city lights reflecting on the water, Ethan stopped. Lucas, he said, his voice steady, I love you, and I'm not afraid anymore. My heart swelled, and I kissed him, the world fading around us. It was a promise, a beginning. When we returned to Richmond, Diane was waiting. She'd spoken to Robert, and though he wasn't ready to talk, she said he was trying. Give him time, she said again, but this time her voice held hope. Ethan hugged her, and for the first time, I saw her smile fully. The summer ended, but our story didn't. Ethan and I returned to NYU, closer than ever, building a life where love didn't need to hide. Robert reached out months later, a short letter apologizing for his silence. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Ethan kept it on his desk, a reminder that change was possible, even if it was slow. For me, that summer taught me that love, real, raw, honest love, could weather any storm. It wasn't just a vacation. It was the moment I found my home in Ethan's heart, and no secret could take that away.